Lovely to see so many people here. So we've been following, we just kicked off, Vadanaya last week kicked off our new theme, Wisdom Beyond Words. And he kicked it off by sort of talking about, what we mean by wisdom in Buddhism, and how we can approach it, how we can develop it. And tonight, I'm going to introduce what is often said to be the central idea, the central concept behind Buddhist wisdom teaching, called conditioned co-production. Pratitya Samutpada in Sanskrit. Pratitya Samutpada sounds exactly the same in Pali, the language that a lot of the earliest discourses are written in. So, conditioned co-production. Okay, what does it mean? What does it mean? Let's look at the Sanskrit. Pratitya means dependent or depending on. Sam means same. It's from the same root as same, our same. So it means same. And Utpada means arising. So if we look at that just completely literally, it means dependent, same, arising. Something like that. We usually translate it as conditioned co-production. Conditioned. It arises, things arise in dependence on conditions. They arise together. Production, they're produced. So, conditioned arising together. Conditioned mutual co-arising. Dependent mutual co-arising. You can think of any number of different ways. So, if that doesn't mean anything to you, well, don't worry, basically. Don't worry. I'm going to unpack it, and those are just some words. Now, it's often summed up, or briefly summed up, in that little quote that's there on the side. This being, that becomes. From the arising of this, that arises. This not being, that does not become. From the ceasing of this, that ceases. That is just incredibly easy to misunderstand. That is incredibly easy to take that as meaning just cause and effect. From the arising of this, that arises. We know that. A new virus arises, we get a pandemic, When something ceases, it stops. We know all of that. So it's incredibly easy to misunderstand it as something far simpler than it is. We have, and I'll talk about that as we go along. So, as I imagine Vadanaya said last week, when we talk about wisdom in Buddhism, we mean something quite specific. We don't mean just knowing a lot. Certainly not. We don't mean knowing a lot. We just don't mean being clever and intelligent or having naps, as we say. The word we use for enlightened wisdom is bodhi. It's got a connection with the awakening. It's a direct vision. It's a direct experience of the nature of reality. It's a direct knowing, not a knowing about, okay? It's not knowing about, it's a direct knowing. And I don't know how many times it's been said in the Dharma and in Buddhist talks and etc., it cannot be communicated in words. So, okay, I'm going to give a talk about it. Cannot be communicated in words. And then what does that mean? Well, an analogy that I sometimes use for that is that trying to communicate bodhi, enlightened vision, in words might be like trying to describe the color blue to somebody who'd been blind or totally colorblind from birth. You could talk about it, but you could absolutely never communicate the experience of seeing the color blue to someone who hadn't had it. So we know the story. The Buddha sits under the Bodhi tree, having really sort of got a head of steam of practice, and he breaks through in the last watch of the night. He breaks through to full enlightenment. He sees the nature of things, full enlightened wisdom, Bodhi. And we're told that shortly after that happened, he thought, I can't describe this to others. I cannot describe this. How am I going to communicate that? How am I going to communicate the colour blue to people who've never seen it, or something like that, but much bigger? So at first he doubted that there was any point in teaching based on his enlightenment experience, any point in trying to communicate what he had seen. But then we are told he had a vision. He had a vision of a lake full of lotuses. Now, lotuses are very like our water lilies. They grow in horrible muddy places, in horrible muddy water, and they gradually come up, and eventually they open into the sunlight, and they are just beautiful. They look completely spotless. They look like no dirt could ever touch them. They've got this wonderful glowing golden center like sunlight. That's what ours are like. So, yeah, I'm sure these are even more beautiful because they're in bigger colors. So he sees a lake full of lotuses in this vision. Some of the lotuses are still absolutely in the grot at the bottom of this lake. Some are growing up through the dirty, muddy water. Some are getting near the top. Some are actually emerged and are ready to open into the sunlight. So the Buddha sees this vision, and although he knows that he cannot communicate what it's like to be open in the sunlight, he realizes he can communicate what might help those lotuses to grow. So he teaches the Dharma. He comes up with the Dharma. The Dharma is a horticultural manual for the cultivation of lotuses. Later, it gets described as there's a sutra called the White Lotus Sutra, where the Buddha says all the teachings, they're all skillful means. Only a Buddha can understand the nature of things, but the teachings are skillful means. They're meant to help you to develop, help you to grow. Help us to become the sort of people who can see the nature of things, the sort of people who can open in the sunlight. Because the nature of things cannot be captured in words and concepts. So the nature of things cannot be captured in words and concepts, but that does not mean that words and concepts are not important. Okay? There's a sort of little quote from a Buddhist text called The Awakening of Faith that says, we use words to go beyond words to see the pure wordless wisdom. So it doesn't mean that words aren't necessary and important. We have got the wrong end of the stick, okay? We've got the wrong end of the stick about the nature of things. We've got a whole load of concepts that are faulty, that we think the nature of things is like this, and it's not. We've got faulty concepts, and the Dharma can give us better concepts. And we live by these faulty concepts. So this idea of concepts and the nature of things, we could liken concepts about the nature of things to a map. The map is not the same as the country that's mapped. So looking at a map of France is not the same as being in France. But having a good map is pretty useful, actually. So having better concepts is not the same as Bodhi, but it is. It gives us a much more reliable map by which to live and move towards enlightenment. So if our map is wrong, we get in trouble. If we got the wrong map, we might set off for Paris and ends up in Grimsby. If we've got the wrong spiritual map, we might set off for enlightenment and end up heaven knows where. So we need right concepts. We need more accurate concepts than the ones we've inherited from our culture, from our conditioning, etc., etc. So and we often call having decent concepts right view in Buddhism, having right view, having concepts that help rather than hinder. So having decided to teach, having thought, well, I can't communicate this, but I can help these beings to grow so that they can see it themselves, the Buddha needed to come up with some concepts. He needed to come up with some concepts to give us a better map. And the central concept that he came up with was this Pratitya Samutpada, conditioned co-production. Now, that is not the same as his vision, but it's his attempt to transform that, to sort of step down that vision into something that works for us, that gives us a better idea of the nature of things. And whole loads of other Buddhist wisdom teachings sort of drop out of that we'll be hearing about in future days, future weeks. Now, this conditioned co-production, in traditional Buddhism, it's often, or in some schools of traditional Buddhism, it's often equated completely with what are called the 12 nidanas, the 12 links. Nidana means link, like a link in a chain. And these are the 12 linked states, linked events that are around the edge of the wheel of life, which we talked about a little while ago. And I haven't got time to go into them now, but basically these 12 linked events show how, unless we do something about it, how we act now is determined by our past. And how we act now creates our future. So if we're not careful, unless we do something about it, the past creates the present, which creates the future. And we are in an endless wheel. We're in an endless wheel, and that's what the wheel of life is. We just go round and round and round, getting nowhere, deepening our ruts, unless we do something about it. Unless we exercise some free will, if you like, unless we make some choices to respond differently, we just go round in circles. And we're all familiar, if we've done our introductory course, we're all familiar with the most important bit of these 12 links. The point where we have a choice, what we call the gap, the bit where we can get out of the vicious circle and create a new future. So we've all heard about this. We have sense contact. Something pushes our buttons. It could be a thought. It could be something impinging from outside. Something pushes our buttons. The world pushes our buttons, and we get a feeling. And what we mean by feeling here is very simple. It means either nice or nasty, comfortable or uncomfortable. Our boss, something goes wrong at work and our boss says, "Hey, did you do that?" And we go, "Oh, that's uncomfortable." "No, it wasn't me, Gov." We avoid the discomfort of blame, for example. But so we get feeling of either comfortable or uncomfortable, nice or nasty. And the next link in the chain is craving. We try to go for what's comfortable and to avoid what's uncomfortable. And we do this all the time. The world is constantly pressing our buttons, and we're constantly choosing what feels better, what feels more comfortable. And then we go back around the wheel. Or we can choose to face some discomfort, do the skillful thing rather than choosing the thing that feels comfortable. We say, "Yes, I'm sorry, I really messed that up," to our boss, rather than, "Oh, no, it wasn't me." Or, any number of things. We go into that difficult situation and try and sort it out rather than avoiding it. Any number of things. Just to get to a better place, we have to be able to face some discomfort. We want to get fit, we got to go running. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's raining, etc., etc. So we have to learn to face some discomfort to get to a better place. And that's the gap. We can be in the gap. We can make skillful choices, choosing what is skillful rather than what feels pleasant or in the moment, or what avoids what's unpleasant in the moment. We're in the gap, we exercise choice. We create a more positive future. And from a practical point of view, this is the most important application of Pratitya Samutpada, conditioned co-production. If everything I say in this talk from now on sounds like complete gobbledygook, just hang on to that. The law of karma, the idea that unless we do something different, we're just going to go around this wheel. The past is going to determine how we act now. That's going to create our future. And to change that, to break into that, we have to face some discomfort or avoid just going with what's pleasant. If everything else from now on is complete rubbish, forget it. And just hold on to that as Pratitya Samutpada. There's a reason why it's so emphasized in traditional schools. But those 12 links that go around the edge of the wheel of life, they are just one example of how Pratitya Samutpada works, of how conditioned co-production works. There are many others in the Buddhist texts, many others in the very early Buddhist texts. Some go round and round in circles and just create more and more problems. Some go upwards, they go in a spiral. Better things happen that create better things that create better things. But there are lots of examples in the Pali Canon, in the Buddhist scriptures, of linked chains of events, apart from that one. So Pratitya Samutpada, conditioned co-production, is a general principle. It's a general principle. It's not the 12 links. As we've said, it's often summed up in from the arising of this, that arises. From the ceasing of this, that ceases. And as I said, it's easy to see that as mere cause and effect. And that's how it's often interpreted, I think, in the West, as being cause and effect. So the Indians were so stupid at that time. They didn't realize that it was cause and effect. They thought everything was caused by gods or something. And the Buddha was teaching cause and effect. That's a sort of, it dumbs it down ridiculously. Cause and effect are obvious. We all know about it, and the Indians at the Buddha's time knew about it. Without a knowledge of cause and effect, an understanding of cause and effect, our human ability to think and predict futures is meaningless. We all know about cause and effect. Indian farmers knew that if they didn't manure and water their crops, it didn't grow. They didn't grow. If they didn't put them in good soil, they didn't grow. If they didn't use good seed, they didn't grow. Indian kings at the time knew that if they didn't maintain an army, they'd get invaded. We know about cause and effect. They knew about cause and effect. So it's not that. It's not cause and effect. So it's a little less obvious than that. And it's often talked about in terms of what's called conditionality, which I think it says there, conditionality. So rather than straight line, this causes this, conditionality tells us that any event depends on an almost infinite, well, no, not an almost, an infinite number of other conditions for its existence. So this lectern, it's made out of wood. It came from a tree. The tree depended on sun, rain, soil, and obviously the tree that preceded it, whose seed it came from. The rain depends on the oceans, really complex weather patterns, evaporation. The soil depends on the underlying rock, all the things that have grown in or around there, the animals and the plants that have created the humus for the soil, not hummus. I could tell a story about that, but hummus sandwiches. Anyway, the fungi and the bacteria, really complex ecosystem in that soil that turn all of that into something that the plant can use. So it depends on all of that. It depends on the person who made it, the people perhaps who made it. So the people in the sawmill who cut it up into planks, and then the person who sort of glued it all together. And they depend on their mother and their father, and each of them depends on their mother and their father, and all the food they've ever eaten, and all the people who grew the food they've ever eaten, and their teachers. It was created with a saw, presumably. It's a machinery, the people who created the machinery, the iron that went into the machinery. Everything everything depends on this really complex web of conditions. So I studied at university, I studied biology, and we learned that in natural ecosystems, really complicated natural ecosystems, you change one thing, everything changes. Everything depends on everything else. You change one thing, everything changes. Everything's affected. So this sort of idea of conditionality, complex conditionality, is a more sophisticated understanding of Pratitya Samutpada, conditioned co-production, than mere causality. But I don't think it's it. I mean, it's maybe as close as we can get to understanding it, but it's not quite what the Buddha was getting at. It's not all of what, it's included, but it's not all of what the Buddha was getting at. So there's a sutta, a discourse in the Pali Canon, where Ananda, the Buddha's great friend and companion, says, it's wonderful, it's marvelous, the depth of this Pratitya Samutpada and how deep it appears. But I reckon it's ever so plain. In other words, I reckon it's pretty obvious, really. To which the Buddha replied, say not so, Ananda, say not so. Deep indeed is this Pratitya Samutpada, and deep it appears, hard to perceive, hard to understand, calm, sublime, beyond logic, subtle, intelligible only to the wise. And by the wise there, he means people with some degree of insight into the nature of things, some degree of bodhi. So it's hard to perceive, it's hard to understand, calm, sublime, beyond logic, subtle, intelligible only to the wise. I can understand it, so I assume you can understand it. And I don't think we're enlightened. So I'm afraid we haven't quite got it, have we? We haven't quite got it. I can understand that everything depends on complex web of conditions, and so can you. But we're not enlightened, so that's not it. It's not all of it. It's not the vision behind it, if you like. So to get maybe a little bit closer to the vision behind it, I'm going to read a few things. I'm going to read, first of all, an excerpt from a book by a guy called Buddhaghosa, who's probably the most one of the most influential commentators on the early Buddhist texts. It's a book called The Path of Purification, which we've got in the library, except I forgot to bring it back. So this book is virtually unreadable. In fact, it seems to have been translated. I mean, for a start, he's very verbose. He goes on and he repeats himself a lot. And it seems to have been translated by one of those people who produces the instructions for assembling things that you buy online, who doesn't really speak English and works in a factory in China somewhere, because it's like, what? So I've attempted to make some sense of it, okay, and I've shortened it considerably because it's very, very long. But this is what I think, well, it is what he's getting at in his discourse on the meaning of Pratitya Samutpada, the meaning of conditioned co-production. The meaning of Pratitya Samutpada must be sought from grammar. Some see it as a simple arising due to conditions. This is untenable. Why? It is a shallow understanding that does not allow any profound understanding. It's ungrammatical. As to its lack of profound understanding, the Blessed One, i.e. the Buddha, has said, this Pratitya Samutpada is profound Ananda, and profound it appears, but there is none of that in simple arising due to conditions. So Pratitya Samutpada is not simple arising, as this would allow of no profound treatment. We should remember the Blessed One's words. This term relates to a totality of states produced by conditionality from a totality of previous states. A totality of states arising from a totality of previous states. The totality of states arises as a togetherness. Thus, it is a co-arising. Phenomena exist in mutual interdependence. Together, in combination, they produce a common fruit, and none can be dispensed with. This conditionality makes states arise together and simultaneously, not piecemeal and successively. That is why it is called conditioned co-production. It points to the uninterrupted cause-fruit continuity of any set of conditions. This is the meaning of the mere words Pratitya Samutpada, conditioned co-production. I hope that's clear. Or we could pick a few things out of that. Phenomena exist in mutual interdependence. Together, in combination, they produce a common fruit. The totality of states arises as a togetherness. So, okay, that seems to be pointing to this vision of wholeness, this vision of, everything connected to everything else, everything arising from everything else, no individual things, really, just this process. So that's one thing. And then I'll read something else. Another angle, if you like, on the mystery of Pratitya Samutpada from a sutta, a discourse in which a disciple called Sariputra, who's said to be the wisest of the Buddha's disciples, is asked about part of the Nidana chain. So this part of the Nidana chain, the one that I mentioned earlier, the 12 links, it's a link between what's called name and form and consciousness. So I take that to mean a link between physical being and consciousness. Which comes first? So this guy called Kotita asks, well, which comes first? Which causes which? And Shariputra, the wise one, says, very well then, Kotita, my friend, I will give you an analogy. For there are cases where through the use of an analogy, intelligent people can understand the meaning. It is as if two sheaves of reeds were to stand against one another. In the same way, from name and form as a requisite condition comes consciousness, and from consciousness as a requisite condition comes name and form. If one were to pull away one of these sheaves of reeds, the other would fall. If one were to pull away the other, the first one would fall. So he's saying it's not that the body gives rise to consciousness, it's not that the consciousness gives rise to the body, they arise together, they co-produce. They mutually co-produce. Seems to be what Shariputra is saying. We seem to have somewhere a vision here. I mean, it would be completely pretentious of me to say that I understand what the Buddha means by this. It would be ridiculously whatever. But I think it's pointing at something, a vision in which everything arises together. Nothing could exist without everything else. Mind and matter, inner and outer, they arise together. There's nothing separate. So me and you and the moon, your body and your mind, they're all what a lot of Buddhist schools call non-different. They are not two, as a lot of Buddhist schools say. Trying to avoid saying it's one, because it's not all one, it's just not two. Well, look, this is a talk about Buddhist wisdom. What do you want? I mean, for heaven's sakes. If it was easy, we'd all got it, wouldn't we? I mean, anyway, so it's pointing to this vision. It's pointing to a vision that I think could be called mystical, a sort of vision of wholeness, a vision of everything, nothing existing completely separately. I mean, and I think there have been people in our society who glimpsed something of this. So maybe we get a hint of it from Blake's poems, Blake's lines, to see a world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wildflower, to hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. Maybe that was based on a bit of a glimpse of something like this. Or we could also maybe see it in the 17th century writings of Thomas Traherne, his Centuries of Meditation. I quite like this. You never enjoy the world aright till the sea itself floweth in your veins, till you are clothed with the heavens and crowned with the stars, and perceive yourself to be the heir of the whole world, and more so because men are in it who are everyone heirs as well as you. Till you love all men so as to desire their happiness with a thirst equal to your own, you never enjoy the world. The sea itself flows in our veins. I don't know, it seems to be getting at something similar, that we're not separate. We are absolutely not separate. So maybe that's what the vision behind conditioned co-production is all about. I think we can step down from that. It's presented to us as a concept, the idea of the 12 nidanas, the idea that the past can create the present can create the future, the law of karma. We need to break into that. That would be a really useful just understanding from it. The idea that everything is created by a web of conditions. So, you know, when you blame somebody for something, we're being very simplistic. There's a whole web of conditions that created this event. You can't separate out and say, this causes this causes this. It's just like the whole thing causes the whole thing. I think that's what the Buddha is saying. So those would be two really useful understandings, but there's something behind it. There's something behind it that the Buddha told Ananda he was not going to understand, and that we're not going to understand fully, and maybe we can get some sort of hint of it in our best moments. But I'm going to close with a paradox and a question. So Pratitya Samutpada, in the form of the 12 nidanas that we've talked about, contains the gap. And to be in the gap where we can free ourselves from the wheel and create a new future, free ourselves from the past and create a new future, we need to exercise what we might call free will. We need to make a choice. The Dharma tells us that unless we choose to make skillful choices instead of just going with what's pleasant or what avoids unpleasant, unless we do that, unless we make that choice, which seems to depend on free will, we are not going to get anywhere spiritually. We'll just be on automatic pilot and get nowhere. But the vision of totality, of everything producing everything else that conditioned co-production gives us, could be taken to mean, how on earth can we have free will? Surely we're conditioned, we're thrown along by this web of conditions, this web of events. So how can we have free will? So which is it? Do we have free will? Or don't we have free will? Maybe I'll leave that with you. And maybe you could discuss that in your groups. Okay, thank you.